Hola.
Bueno, por ahí nos mandó un mensaje, creo que todos estamos viendo el chat, el anfitrión que en alrededor de 1 minuto empezará a grabar y que a la hora justo, 3, 4 minutos, empezará a transmitirse por Facebook.
Okay.
Para, especialmente, seguro que lo dijo por mí, porque luego se me salen barbaridades, ¿no? Entonces, para que lo abordemos.
Ya te conocemos, ¿no?
Sí. ¿Cómo estás, Manuel? ¿Cómo te trata por allá? ¿Cómo está lo del COVID y todo este rollo?
Bien, pues el verano estuvo tranquilo, pero desde hace como un mes otra vez empezó a aumentar los casos y ya estamos otra vez aquí encerrados.
Sí, hombre. Pues
Y
es
ahí
el
está,
riesgo
pero bueno,
cuando
por lo menos,
llega el invierno, ¿no?
sí, ahí es donde va a estar lo interesante, porque aquí con esto del flu season, a
Ajá,
todo mundo le da algo, nada más que ahora
claro.
con el pánico de que vaya a ser COVID.
O mezclados, como ya se están dando casos, ¿no?
Sí, sí, sí.
De que-
Y la logística, las escuelas, yo tengo niños que van a la escuela y pues, es un relajo, o sea, las escuelas están abiertas,
sí,
pero
presencialmente.
sí, presencialmente, solamente para los niños hasta 12 años van a la escuela,
Órale, muy bien.
con
Muy bien,
protocolos de al menor caso ya se acabó todo y así, ¿no?
claro. Oye,
Sí.
Luis se irá a conectar, este muchacho de allá eh, que es la interfaz, pues, en el consulado. Luis, ¿qué es?
Luis Soto.
Luis Soto, exacto.
No sé.
Él, algo así, ¿no?
Sí, Luis
Sí, sí.
Soto. Sí, no,
Sí,
yo no he hablado con él últimamente.
ya. Sí, quedó que se iba a conectar. Sabino se disculpó que está en otro evento, pero que se conectará, pues, ¿no? Estará ahorita
Ok,
presente, ¿no?
bien, bien. Y ahí
Es-
más o menos como cuánta gente se está conectando a los eventos.
pues mira, hasta el día de ayer que tuvimos 4 workshops y 6, 7 tutoriales, al final de todos, eh, como se está transmitiendo por Facebook de la ESMIA y la cuenta de Facebook de la UP y también YouTube, aparte los que se conectan por la plataforma, solo en la cuenta de la ESMIA, hasta acabándose ayer el último workshop, teníamos más de 23,000 personas alcanzadas.
Wow.
Entonces,
Es mucho.
ha estado bastante
Qué bien.
nutrida la participación de
Ok.
la gente. Y en las actividades que tenemos mediante la plataforma, como luego tenemos sesiones en paralelas, hemos tenido 90, 80, 60. Las que han sido en vivo, ha habido 100, 200. Ha sido variable, pero como realmente la parte fuerte del Congreso inicia hoy, entonces apenas estamos sacando esas métricas, pero sí el
Ah,
seguimiento
qué
de la
bien.
gente ha sido bastante amplio, ¿eh?
Qué bien, qué bien, qué bueno, qué bueno, qué bueno.
Ya te mandaremos por correo las estadísticas de tu
Sí.
plática, ¿no?
Y normalmente, el año pasado, por ejemplo, MICAI, ¿cuántas personas se registraban? ¿Tienen el dato más o menos cuál
Sí,
era
sí. En
la
promedio ha
población?
habido gente registradas presencialmente, y digamos donde se conglomeran todo es en las magistrales. Hemos tenido 400, 500 gentes. O sea
Ok,
que
es un congreso grande.
es un congreso grandecito, sí. Pues de
Pues
hecho estamos
qué lástima
celebrando
que...
los 20 años de MICAI este año.
Ah, sí.
Sí, sí, 20
Qué bien.
años.
Mira, pues qué lástima que me tocó el año de COVID, porque se me hubiera gustado irme a dar una vuelta.
Por supuesto, pero serás bienvenido para los siguientes años, que esperemos que
Sí, sí,
ceda esta pandemia y
sí,
podamos
sí,
hacerlo
con gusto,
presencial.
con gusto. Una última
Muy bien,
pregunta
pues ya
que
está.
estoy
Sí,
pensando. Es en inglés, ¿eh?
es en inglés,
¿O en
sí,
español?
en
Inglés.
inglés.
Ok, ok.
Muy bien, pues ya estamos en vivo entonces.
Adelante.
Éxito, gracias por estar aquí.
Gracias,
Gracias,
Manuel.
gracias.
Oscar.
Welcome. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Mexican Society for Artificial Intelligence, I'm pleased to introduce to you Dr. Manuel Morales from the University of Montreal, Canada. Dr. Manuel Morales holds a PhD on statistics from Concordia University. He was an assistant professor at York University in Toronto, from where he moved to Montreal and since 2005 became a professor in mathematics at the University of Montreal. He serves on the board of directors of Coyos Intelligence and as a scientific advisor of CapitalWise, two emerging companies in the field of AI in finance and insurance. He's also an experienced scientist and leader in the field of artificial intelligence in banking, and because of this, is often called upon for his knowledge and experience in creating business value through AI. As chief AI scientist at the National Bank of Canada, the sixth largest commercial bank in the country, Manuel oversaw the scientific component of the AI transformation initiative of more than $20 billion banking institution. His work with National Bank was featured in an interview piece at the online edition of Forbes magazine in May 2020. He continues to conduct his research and teaching activities at the University of Montreal, where he is the director of the FinML network, whose mandate is to train the next AI-enabled generation of finance and banking professionals. He's also established himself as a well-known presence in the Montreal fintech ecosystem, where he is a scientific advisor of the Holt Accelerator, one of the leading accelerators in Montreal targeting seed startups, and as well as co-founder of the OCF Group, a venture building group that leverages Montreal AI talent in order to help startups to go from Series A to Series B through machine learning technology. We thanked Dr. Morales for giving us the opportunity to present his keynote entitled, "The Role of Artificial Intelligence in the Transformation of the Banking Sector." The structure for the keynote will be as follows. You will first present your talk, and after that we'll have a session of question and answer to close. There are moderators in this room, as well as the social networks, Facebook and YouTube, who will send us the corresponding questions, and I will read them to you, and you can answer them. Please, Dr. Morales, welcome. You can begin when you talk.
Okay, muchas gracias, Oscar. Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. I would have loved for this to be a live talk, but then of course the situation does not allow that this year, but hopefully next year we will be able to have this in person. So thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation to give this talk. So my understanding, and I'm guessing that this has been a very full day of conferences, most of which I understand are on the technical side. When I got the invitation to give a talk here, I proposed to give something on a different note, not so much on the technical aspects of artificial intelligence, but more on the big picture of where and how this is being applied right now, in particular in banking. Now, this is a little bit because of my personal journey. and I think that I can bring that to the table. That experience that I have, the different experiences that I've had in my different roles that I've undertaken. So I think this will be a different talk than the ones you have been listening to today, but hopefully I think there will be a few takeaways that you can take with you today from my talk, which is more on the application side, on understanding what's going on from the point of view of institutions, banks in this case, when they think of AI, when they're beginning to use these technologies to change the way they do business, right? So that's my talk. So like Oscar mentioned, maybe a little bit about myself briefly. So I'm originally a researcher, at the University of Montreal. I've been doing that for over 15 years. Always conducting mainly applied research, collaborative research. So that means in partnership with banks and insurance companies. That led me to create a very particular collaboration with National Bank of Canada. National Bank of Canada is the 6th largest bank in Canada. And when they decided to go ahead with their transformation initiative using AI, they invited me to lead the scientific team. So, and that gave me a different perspective on the kind of research that I was conducting up to that time. So that's what I'm hoping to bring here. So I'm gonna share my screen. So before that, there are two main takeaways. So one is the one I just mentioned, right? So trying to convey the perspective of the business perspective of a bank when they think of AI, and maybe that will give you a little bit of understanding of how they understand these breakthroughs that we are seeing right now in terms of forecasting, classification, prediction. How do they see that and how it applies to banking, right? So that would be one of the first takeaway. Second one would be how come that happens in some that ecosystem that is required to have institutions like banks trying to leverage this technology that is very state of the art. There are very few places in the world where that happens, where that ecosystem and that symbiosis between industry and academia happens. And so I was thinking that another takeaway would be talk about what happened in Montreal that made it a place where these things could happen, right? So those are two takeaways that I would like you to take with you. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. I'm guessing you can see my screen now. So I always like to start my talks when I talk about AI in banking with this slide. For the past maybe 5 years, I'm sure that you have heard a lot about how banks are trying to leverage AI, and there's a lot of buzz around AI in financial services. And I think the general population are still expecting to see that very big breakthrough that AI is supposed to bring, and it's not quite there yet. For instance, when you think, I think we have become accustomed to the level of customer experience that we have with Google, Facebook, Amazon of the world, and we see that that's the customer experience that we are used to now. So when it comes to banks, I think where the experience is still a little bit farther from that, right? So there's still a gap between between people's expectations and what's actually being deployed. at least in financial services. And so what's happening is that it takes more than just the technology in order to create value, right? And so I always show this slide. So this is from Andrew Ng. And it makes an analogy between artificial intelligence and electricity, right? He mentions how 100 years ago, companies were hiring vice presidents of electricity so that they could think in different ways in which this new technology could start transforming the way their processes, the way they do business, and the way they create value. So what's happening right now, at least in banks, it's a little bit of the same thing, right? So this is new technologies. They exist. We see them. We see the breakthroughs happening. Like today, I'm sure that you saw many interesting talks about how we can come up with better models to do and perform certain tasks. And so the technology is there, but then how you make that technology start creating value in the business, and in particular in banking. So that's a whole different story. And why? Because it requires an infrastructure that it's not there. Just like with electricity, right? With electricity, yes, there were scientists trying to understand electricity and beginning to use it. That was 200 years ago. But before it could start changing the way industry worked, first there has to be a big effort in terms of creating the infrastructure that is required to deploy electricity at a large scale. So that's a little bit of what's happening, and that's one of the main challenges that I encounter when joining the bank. Even though it was a very research-oriented team. Still, when you connect with the business side, then that whole thing changes, because then you realize that you don't have the infrastructure that is required to do what you want to, right? So that's a first comment. So in order to create value with this technology in banking, it's still a few years ahead of us, and mainly because banks are a legacy industries, in the sense that they've been doing the same thing for the past 200 years. So they are very paper-based. Well, now it's PDF-based, but still many of the processes, they have bottlenecks where you still have people going through documents, people looking at things, decisions being made across teams. So it's not a unified process like in other industries that were born digital right from the start, right? So that's one of the main things that is different in banking with respect to other industries that were born technological. Okay, I'm trying to change. There you go. So yeah, so like I was mentioning, creating value with AI is harder and easier than you think. So it is harder in the sense that I mean, it is easy in the sense that yes, talent is out there. There are a lot of very talented people doing this kind of research. The models are there. Many of these things are being developed open source now. So every breakthrough that you can see in conferences, they're available to anybody, right? So knowledge, state-of-the-art knowledge is out there, and talent. Now it is harder because what that requires, it requires transforming the way the institution works, and that's where the challenge is. And maybe the first challenge that a scientist encounters when they joined an institution in the financial service sector that it's trying to transform itself is this one, is this myth here, that artificial intelligence seems to be just like the next generation set of models, right? So it's just a mixture of statistics, analytics, automation, new models, new ways of doing things, right? But then, and then it would just require to bring this knowledge into the company, and then you would be able to create value. Now, the thing is that, and maybe you know that, is that it's not that simple. What AI it's offering, it's a different way of doing things, right? Leveraging data and creating data, and then using again that data to create processes that adapt to new environments and that they assist humans in making decisions. So it requires a whole different way of looking at things, and that's one of the things I want to talk to you about during this talk. And that understanding, that's a very first but very difficult step for institutions to take, especially large banks. Now, why would a financial institution want to evolve or change, right? Well, what's happening is that we are witnessing disruption in the making, right? In the financial services sector. So everything is there. All the four components of disruption are there. On one side, we have technologies that are available. Like I said, these technologies, state of the art, are available, and talent, artificial intelligence, blockchain, and whatnot, they are there. Like I mentioned also, customer expectations are very high because they are used to a certain level of service coming from the Amazon, Google, and Facebooks of the world, right? And they are not finding that customer experience in banking right now. There is an increased competition, right? So big players, big banks, only a handful of them are beginning to invest resources in hiring the talent, investing in the infrastructure that is required to become a digital enterprise. And so they're challenging other banks. And then on the other hand, you also have new players. So you have these so-called fintechs. So startups that usually they come out of university ecosystems or university linked ecosystems. So these are people that have the know-how, that have the knowledge, and that they can just go their way and come up with very interesting ideas and then develop them and offer solutions to the customers that are not available currently in banks, right? PayPal, that would be one classic example. So all of these components are there, and so banks are beginning to plan ahead, and they are beginning with their transformation initiatives. Some of them faster than the others, right? So yeah, so it depends on the ecosystem, right? So these are just some figures. For instance, we can see here that in Canada or in Europe, more or less, the level of adoption is similar. For instance, in Canada, you have almost half of new business are, half of new banking institutions are new entrants. So these are fintechs that are beginning to enter the market. That's the same rate as UK, more or less, right? The difference can be in the market share that they're taking, right? In Europe, for instance, in UK, these new entrants are capturing more than 10% of the market, whereas in other markets like Canada, they are only capturing 2%. So that's where you see particular ecosystems influencing how this adoption goes. But at least what you take away from this slide is that new entrants represent worldwide a big part of the financial service landscape. Now the adoption rate depends on the country, that depends on the ecosystem, right? But it's there and it's happening worldwide at different speeds. I didn't do my homework, and I would have liked to show you figures for Mexico and Latin America, but I will do that next time. But anyway, so that gives you the idea of disruption. Now, ecosystem. Maybe I want to take the time. Yeah. This is where I wanted to talk a little bit about ecosystem. So each ecosystem is different. I know the ecosystem here in Canada. I'm beginning to know better the ecosystem in Mexico, and I see similarities and differences. Talking about ecosystem in Mexico and in Canada. So it's network of interconnected agents, so universities, research centers, but as well institutions that have been created or and given the mandate from the government to facilitate the transfer knowledge between universities and industry. Montreal, Canada, it's one of those places where the government is very active in trying to facilitate this knowledge transfer. That explains a little bit the ecosystem in Canada. I will skip this and I will come back to it later. Maybe it makes more sense to continue with the other point that I wanted to make. So financial services, they are ready for disruption. The disruption depends a lot on the ecosystem. We could come back to talking about ecosystems and what makes a good ecosystem a good place for research and innovation. But I want to go back to banking, right? There's a lot of in North America, there are a lot of startups taking place or finding their place in the financial services, right? That they provide different ways of accessing data, aggregating data, making the life of the customer easier when it comes to understanding their spending patterns, having access to credit, transferring money from one country to the other. So these are companies that are finding places where banks are failing at delivering a smooth customer experience, right? And these are the companies where we're seeing artificial intelligence technology, so that is machine learning methods and processes to better serve the customer, right? What does that mean in terms? What does that mean for banks, right? Maybe some specific examples. And here I'm talking about some of them. Most of them are from my experience at National Bank. Places, and then this is I didn't have time to change the language of the slide, or some of the slides, so they're going to be in French. And opportunities. So clearly, marketing, it's a place where we are seeing a lot of application, right? Because they are trying to become digital, right? When you see what, and I will come back to that later, when you see how Facebook and Google are leveraging the data that they are collecting, that's what banks are trying to do now, right? Trying to personalize their offer, their service offer to the clients. And there's a lot of applications here, especially when you try to incorporate alternative data, right? Data collected through other vehicles of interaction between customer and institution, right? Like most of institutions now, they have a mobile application, and so clients, they log in. There's a footprint that each individual is leaving behind when they interact with banks, and so that's been captured, and that gives interesting applications. This leaves a possibility of interesting applications, and some of these applications, they leverage representation learning, deep learning. How do you represent multidimensional sequential data in ways in which is still rich, and it can help predict certain behaviors, right? So that's marketing. Communication, understanding the client's voice, right? Again, banks are very, very, very legacy in this sense. So they still have call centers. Most of the interactions between a client when they complain or when they have a problem between a client and the bank, they are still registered somewhere, and that information is not accessed right now because it's either voice or text. So that's a lot of that leaves room for a lot of AI applications, right? Using natural language processing, creating dialogue systems that could facilitate the way clients interact with banks, and the ways in which that information that now it's been captured can also be leveraged to create new features and understand better the needs of the client and propose solutions faster. Same thing for financial advising, right? And that's mostly for the corporate banking, not so much retail. Retail being me and you having a credit card. This is more companies having access to professional financial advice. So how do you understand the needs of a corporation, that the banking needs of a corporation, right? So that requires that requires understanding of the life cycle of a corporation. And how do you find information about that? That's in constitutive acts or agreements, legal documents, legal and accountant documents that have that information about corporations. So again, leveraging AI. Decisions and predictions, so fraud, risk, financial markets. There's more and more data that is being collected, and so there's room for using machine learning models that are good at detecting patterns and anomalies, right? When you think about financial markets, for instance, now financial markets, they operate at the nanosecond, so that's huge amount of information, and humans are not capable of just following what's going on. However, there's a need for regulation, right? You need to regulate or at least understand what's going on in financial markets. So that's anomaly detection using techniques ranging from machine learning all the way to deep learning, and again, representation learning, right? Credit scoring. How do you assess the credit profile of a client, leveraging new data, right? It's becoming clear that using traditional data, that's not enough. When you use traditional data, you're leaving outside of the credit spectrum a big market share. There are many individuals that are not a good fit for traditional models of credit, and so they do just not have a score. But so that's a missed opportunity for banks to capture different markets, and again, that requires new methods. And then I could just go on with other examples, but probably I will just move on to the challenges. So some of the challenges are infrastructure, right? Data. You have to have a data repository that it's common to all teams, data teams, and that they can use that data and they can put back new data. So it's more about creating data exchanges, not so much as a data repo, but more data exchange where every data is exposed. If I have a team and I have an idea and I want to create a new model, I can take that data and then I can also put in there the new outputs of my models for all the bank to use. That's a very complicated task because banks are very silo. So you have IT, you have financial markets, investment, retail banking, corporate banking, and they just do not talk to each other. I mean, they have walls in between, and that makes it very hard for data to flow. And any initiative that is looking to leverage data encounters that first block. So changing completely the infrastructure. Talent. then again, you need to hire people that have that experience. I was saying that talent is available, but then it's scarce, right? Everybody's competing for this kind of profile. So it's hard for banks to get a hand on good teams that can deliver the vision. Organizational challenges. I will talk about this a little bit more later, but then again, that requires changing the mindset of decision makers, and that sometimes takes a lot of effort, right? And then again, being aware of the social impacts that this is producing, because one of the main assets of a bank is trust, right? And the trust of their clients. Clients, they trust banks with their money, right? That's an asset that a bank does not want to put at risk. So when a bank starts saying that they are leveraging new data, that they are collecting new data, that they're using AI, that makes customers worried. And in Canada and in the States and in Europe, this is a big issue. How do you do that within a responsible way and addressing legal and ethical and cultural considerations, so that by doing so you're not putting in danger that trust that customers are putting in banks, and that implies putting together a very thorough governance structure within the bank. What I mean by that is a structure. Every single AI deployment needs to go through a thorough end-to-end governance process. That is, we need to know who is responsible for what and at what time of the process, right? From the design, who is responsible for designing and for deciding what data are we collecting, what data are we leveraging, are we using, do we have the right to use that data before doing anything else? Our models are discriminating against certain populations. Our models are transparent. That is, if I'm being audited, can I explain why certain model made certain decision? Banks are very regulated, and then again, if they are facing an audit and they cannot explain what a particular model is doing, that puts them at risk. So the governance is very important. But I want to talk about maybe in the remaining 10 to 15 minutes before opening the floor to questions. I wanna talk about this idea of banks not being digital, not being born digital, but wanting to become digital, right? So that's the game changer here. Financial institutions are trying to move that way, and they are putting a lot of it is hard. Like I mentioned, it's hard. There are a lot of challenges, but they're moving in that direction, and that's going to create a whole different world. Probably you have seen this before, and I like to use it just to give. Maybe if you have seen it, maybe you know where I'm heading. If you haven't seen it, maybe I'm sure you will find it interesting. This one, it's trying to help visualize terms of data volume, right? If we think of 1 byte being 1 grain of rice, so that's very small. A kilobyte would be 1 cup of rice, right? So 1,000 grains of rice would be 1 cup of rice. But then it keeps going very fast. If we move up to what one of your folders weight in your computer, then we're talking about megabytes, and that's like 8 bags of rice, right? So it moves up very fast. Gigabytes, which is what your iPhone has in terms of capacity storage. So that's already 3 trucks, large trucks of rice. So that's more impressive. If you go to terabytes, so that's your Dropbox. If you buy the professional plan, so that we're talking about 2 container ships of rice. So that's bigger. Petabyte, that would be enough rice to blanket Manhattan. Exabyte blankets the whole West Coast in the United States. zettabyte that would fill the Pacific Ocean with rice. Then if you keep going, that would be a yottabyte, which is an Earth-size rice, a bowl of rice. Now, the big born digital companies, Facebook, Yahoo, Amazon, they are here. They are at the zettabyte level. Now, banks and financial services are not quite there yet, right? Probably they are at the terabyte, petabyte data, and they are moving towards the other realm, and we can see why. And that's what I want to talk about. If you think about how come this is possible, how come they have so much data? Well, that is because the way they go at it is because every single interaction of an individual with Google, for instance, that's creating new data. Data that has been stored and that it's been used for other purposes. So if you think that there are 2 million searches every minute in Google, then you understand where this is going, right? This is just, it becomes about data and not so much about the actual solution or product that you had in mind. And usually at this point I talk about this this series. It's a Netflix series, and that will be my final comment, my final point. Maybe you have seen Westworld. Westworld is this Netflix series that happens in the far west, but actually it turns out that you realize that what's happening is that it's in the future, and if you haven't seen it, I will tell you the how it ends. So if you don't want to hear it, and so what happens is that it turns out that if you are rich and then you pay enough money, then you can be taken into this world where it's like the far west. Everybody's there, but it's populated by robots, very human-like. Like there are humans. You cannot see the difference between a human and a robot. And there, you, the human, can live your dreams. Like if you were living there, knowing that nothing will happen to you because the other ones are robots. So that's the product they sell, right? But it turns out that at the end, what's happening is that through those interactions of humans going to Westworld, this company is collecting all those interactions to better understand the individual that it's making that trip, with the goal of making him live forever, right? The idea would be they can create a robot that physically looks like this person, and then now that they know every single way in which his mind works, they can transplant that not that brain, but that entity into the robot, and that he could continue living forever. So probably you see now what's the question mark here. It's like that's Google and Facebook premise. We have products, but then these products, they give a service, but then by doing so, they're collecting data that could be used and leveraged to do other things that we do not know yet, and that best help understand better the client. So there's this notion of creating data through carrot applications. So that's applications that give yes a service, but they collect data. They're not the ultimate goal, but one of their goals is to collect data to create better features that would create more data, and then that circle goes on. I'm trying to think how can I summarize this without going over time. So there's this idea of creating new data, and in fact now banks are going this way. Banks that are going through a transformation right now, every deployment, every new solution, every new portal that they put on their website, it's collecting new data, interactions, right? What kind of questions I ask when I go through the chatbot, where am I connecting from when I use my application, right? What kind of queries I am doing. That's the kind of information they're collecting, and that's how they're beginning to be digital, and that's why they're beginning to use artificial intelligence technologies, right? Deep learning, and all the different architectures that you can build with deep learning methods. To conclude, I just want to give you a quick look at this idea here. Traditionally, banks, they work, I mean, when I'm thinking about analytics, that is using data to make decisions, traditionally they work in a very straightforward line, right? So they have data, a data lake at best. They have models, it could be humans, and then they create reports or insights that can be used by other teams, right? So it's very straightforward. The first step in the transformation is beginning to use more sophisticated methods, right? Like machine learning methods, but still within the same straight line, right? Data, more complicated methods, more sophisticated outputs, but still it's a very straight line. And actually that's one of the things you encounter at the beginning when banks think that they are doing AI, they begin by doing this. And they begin by saying we're doing deep learning, and they're putting deep learning here. That is just creating vanilla architectures, playing around with a number of layers and neurons, and then they have their AI process. But that's not what this is about, right? Then very quickly they realize that where do you want to go? It's go to the Google and Facebook perspective, right? And which is this. Yes, you have data. Yes, you have sophisticated models. These are outputs that then are put into solutions that interact with either clients or employees, because all these also are being deployed internally to help employees do their job better. So there are solutions mostly deployed on the cloud. Yes, they have a purpose, but then they collect more data, and then this data gets feedback into the original data exchange, and then the model ends up adapting and doing better a job at producing or giving a service, right? And through that collection of data, then there are other type of solutions that can be designed. Okay, so when we talk about AI in banking, this is what's happening right now. Some of the institutions are. Oops, I can't go back. No. Some of the institutions are still at the straight line level, using machine learning and complicated models, but this is hard to put through, right? Because it requires a complete change of the pipeline of the infrastructure and of the applications, right? So this is why I find that it's very interesting and very exciting. The financial services right now for people doing research. Current research where we see the breakthroughs are usually targeting problems in computer vision, text, language, and that's where we see the main success stories, right? Translation, image classification, but then these techniques, they were tailor-made for those particular applications. Now this represents a new paradigm that has new challenges in terms of modeling, right? Like representation learning that I was saying. How do you use what has been done in other applications in order to capture this new data in this context and help this feedback loop to do better its job? I'm gonna skip this because I don't wanna, I'm gonna finish with this, all right? So on a funny note, one of the things that I found interesting when I was working for the bank was the comments coming from the decision makers that do not understand what kind of technology we're working with, right? So this is in French. I will just translate it. So there's like a fear of change that you see in financial services. Comments like this one is common. So it says like the modern world is
submerging people with data. There's just too much information, and this could be bad, and it creates confusion for people. When you read this, probably you have heard that from somebody who said that. Well, it turns out that this dates back to the 16th century, and the technology they were referring to was the printing press. So this consistent fear of new technology and then what that means, we have seen it at every step of the way. We're seeing it now, and when you work as a
scientist in banks or in any other industry, usually you're
confronted to this type of
comments and attitudes, right? So that's another challenge that usually we face as scientists working in industry. And I think I'm going to stop there, and that will open the floor for questions if there is any. I don't know how you want to go about it, Oscar. But thank you anyway. Thanks for the invitation.
Okay. Thank you, Manuel. We are waiting for your questions. Please, chairs, could you report some activity? Social networks.
There are no questions on social.
Social here in the room. Let me give me a second, Simon. Questions. Well, while the questions arise, I want you to comment about what do you think about the trading? How this trading does the bank are attending or is not a priority? Because this is an approach from the point of view from the traditional customer where you are collect data, but it's not. I can see nothing about the challenge about the new challenge for investment and the marketplace.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that when we were prioritizing our projects, it turned out that financial markets was not one of them, and for one reason, that's usually the place where innovation has been conducted for the past 15 years or so, right? So that they are very at the very forefront of technology in terms of infrastructure, data teams, and they're pushing forward the forecasting component of what they do, and they're very good at it. And if we come with new ways of doing things, the value that gets created is a gradual increase compared to what you would obtain within a bank. Instead of going for that, you go for changing retail banking, which is where things are lagging behind. So that explains why most banks going through this transformation, they are aiming first to change the retail rather than financial markets, which are, in any case, in my opinion, I think it's harder to find patterns there. in mathematical terms, the distribution behind what's going on in the financial market, it's just more complicated than, and the gains that we can obtain by throwing new technology to it, it's limited,
Okay.
in my opinion.
Okay. Now we have one question from Facebook. Excuse me, from YouTube. Israel Hernandez, how is AI disrupting the stock brokerage service?
The stock brokerage service. I think some of the things that I'm seeing are in terms of the question was about AI or technology in general.
AI.
Yeah. What I'm seeing is there are many service data providers that are providing new data feeds that try to capture unstructured data that is not present in the market. Like usually most of the efforts, right, up to 10 years ago was concentrated on aggregating data from the markets, right? But everything that happened around, like news and financial statements, things going on the courts, because sometimes when there's a process against a particular company, that affects the stock market. So all that information was not captured. And so there are some data providers that are trying to come up with new indices or data that leverages AI to create insights from unstructured data. So I think that's one of the places where you're seeing some disruption.
Okay, thank you. Now we have a question from Facebook. Nestor, what will be, on your opinion, the next trend of AI for fintech?
Well, there are a few. Well, there's payments, right? How do you make? How can you facilitate a payment platform that works across different banks? Because any single individual has more than one bank, right? And I'm sure that most people here have like 2 or 3 accounts with different banks. Unifying that across countries as well. That's where we're seeing disruption. But one place where I see disruption as well is on onboarding of clients, right? When you open an account or you ask for a mortgage, you still have to pick up the phone at some point, right? So automating parts of that process, that's gonna need leveraging a lot of image processing, text, optical character recognition, those kind of technologies, and that's not quite there yet. There's no platform that helps you do that very in a transparent way.
Okay. Now, a new question. Nestor, what about fraud prediction? It's a big need for both individuals and it's for companies.
Yeah, then again, that's another place where we see this technology being applied, and especially at the merchant level, right? Because when you pay with a credit card, the merchant, so the store where you bought, that company is, for her, it's hard to fight fraud. Not for the bank as well, but it's even harder for the merchants, because if I buy something and then I say that I didn't do it and I file a complaint with my bank, then they go to the merchant and it's on the merchant to prove that I didn't do that transaction. So helping devise solutions that help merchants or people selling goods better understand the fraud and stop it before it happens, right? Understanding patterns That's where that's what's happening. A lot of the innovation. Again, also in financial markets, I'm working with my other hat as a researcher with the Montreal Stock Exchange, and all of the transactions are at the nanosecond level now. And if you're a regulator and you're trying to understand what's going on in terms of strategies, some of those strategies are manipulating the market, right? And that's not allowed. And so as a regulator, you need to understand how users are deploying algorithms. And to do that, you need also AI to understand that landscape. So that's another place where fraud is also being detected through anomaly detection techniques, sequential representation learning.
Okay, we have time for the last question. Dave Gahan from Facebook. Is the banking industry competing each other in AI issues, or does exist some kind of collaboration?
I think it depends on the ecosystem and on the country. Here in Canada, there's a tradition of collaboration when it comes to things where banks are not competing. Like, for instance, money laundering, anti-money laundering efforts are good for all the banks alike, right? So there's no advantage for a bank to have the best anti-money laundering method. So there's some beginnings of collaboration in those directions, right? So, but then again, it varies from a country to another.
Okay, thank you. We have to finish this. So we are close to finish this session. Well, I think that the community that follows us and the virtual assistants from very parts of the world are very grateful that you have shared with your professional experience with us. Now we'll share my screen to show your diploma. The Mexican Society for Artificial Intelligence, SMIA, and the Universidad Panamericana award this certificate to Manuel Morales for participating as a speaker in the keynote entitled "The Role of Artificial Intelligence in the Transformation of the Banking Sector" at the 19th Mexican International Conference of Artificial Intelligence, MICAI 2020, Mexico City, Mexico. Thanks, Manuel. Thanks to everybody who assisted and participated in these sessions. And
Thank you for the invitation.
Well, with no more questions, no more comments, and because the time it's over, thanks for your participation. We need to close this transmission. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Manuel.
Thank you. Thank you, Oscar. Thanks.